matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way.
We take you places, we teach you new things, and we make you feel like, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I'm John Dickerson. Join me for the Daily Report, weekdays on CBS News 24/7.
Across our nation, we witness a full-on assault, state by state, on reproductive freedom. And understand who is to blame. Former President Donald Trump did this.
What about those in the womb who are crying out to be born?
Police came in and in exactly 2 hours, everything was over. It was a beautiful thing to watch.
Hello, I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. It's been a busy day, so let's get right to it. Pro-Palestinian protests have grown more turbulent at colleges across the country, with police arresting nearly 300 people in New York overnight and moving in to remove encampments and break up clashes with counter-protesters at colleges and universities across the country. But first, another state has joined the ranks of nearly 24 states that have imposed major abortion bans or restrictions now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned. And this state is a big one. It's Florida. And Florida's 6-week ban went into effect today, meaning it will now be nearly impossible to get an abortion anywhere in the South.
At 6-week gestation, most patients don't even realize they're pregnant. With this new abortion ban, there are an overwhelming number of scared, confused, and frustrated Floridians.
And while Florida's law goes into effect, the Arizona Senate has voted just this afternoon to repeal the 1864 near-total abortion ban that was reinstated by the Arizona Supreme Court last month. 2 Republicans crossed the aisle to join Democrats to vote for this repeal. It will now head to the Democratic governor's desk, and she says she will sign it. We're covering all of these major abortion developments in both states. Our Nydia Cavazos is in Jacksonville, Florida, but we're going to start tonight with Janet Shamlian in Phoenix in the battleground state of Arizona. Janet, good to see you. You've been covering this all day. The Arizona Senate just voted to repeal the state's near-total abortion ban. Walk us through that vote and the reaction.
Hi, Nancy. It's good to be with you from Phoenix. Yeah, it was a busy day here at the Capitol. They got the votes they needed because a couple of Republican lawmakers, a couple of senators crossed the aisle and voted with the Democrats. So it was a 16-14 vote. They kind of knew that was going to happen, but the Republicans were pretty angry about it, that they had 2 of their members, what they said, defect to the other side. And it kind of delayed things for a while as they insisted on recounts and discussing why they voted as they did. But it does give this repeal now legs to send to the governor, as you said, and she said she will sign it probably tomorrow. Why this is important is because this will take the bite out of the state Supreme Court's ruling that an 1800 era's law, an abortion ban, a near-total abortion ban that's supposed to go into effect at the end of June, this will supersede that, right? But it won't do so right away because that Supreme Court ruling here in Arizona will take effect June 27th. But what happened today won't take effect until 30 days after the legislature adjourns here for the season. And that right now is a TBD date, Nancy.
So there could be a gap, is what you're saying, Janet, between when the 1864 bill goes into effect and then when the bill gets repealed.
And it could be 2 or 3 months, Nancy. We just don't know. Are Republicans now going to try to delay the session and try to adjourn later? But it could be a period of several months.
And eventually, though, once this goes into effect, does this mean that the state reverts back to the restrictions that were put in place, a 15-week threshold back in 2022?
Absolutely. And that is what's in effect right now. Abortion is legal here in Arizona until 15 weeks' time, right? So that's what they will go back to, unless there is this ballot initiative in November that seems like it certainly has enough signatures to make it, which would be much less restrictive on when abortions would be allowed.
And, you know, that's been sort of hanging over everything, the fact that this ballot measure is going to be most likely on the ballot in Arizona in November. It would enshrine the right to an abortion in the Constitution. Does today's vote take some of the air out of that balloon?
I don't think so. Talking to voters here, as I have this week, and I've been here for a couple of weeks now, people really want to see this as a constitutional amendment, the right to abortion. As you've mentioned, this is a battleground state, right? And this issue is galvanizing voters. So there's a lot of concerns from Republicans, right, that this is going to bring Democrats out big time in November. So I don't think the air is out of it, but it feels like a reprieve for those who support abortion rights.
Wow. So it sounds like the abortion regulations in that state could change multiple times over the next 6 months. Janet, glad to hear that you are covering all of it. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Nancy.
Vice President Kamala Harris was in Jacksonville, Florida today. She was there to give a speech on reproductive freedom as part of her nationwide tour marking the 51st anniversary of Roe v. Wade.
As of this morning, 4 million women in this state woke up with fewer reproductive freedoms than they had last night.
The vice president's Florida visit comes the same day as the 6-week abortion ban becomes law in that state. That means almost every state in the South, take a look at this map, now has severe limits on abortion. In most of those states, it is now nearly outlawed. To talk about the impact of that, Nidia Cavazos joins us from Jacksonville, Florida, where the vice president was giving that speech today. Okay, Nidia, this law bans abortion after 6 weeks, a point at which many women don't even know they are pregnant. What kinds of penalties do women and healthcare providers in Florida now face if they do carry out an abortion after that point?
Nancy, Florida's 6-week abortion ban is now one of the most restrictive bans that we're seeing all across the U.S. And what this means for doctors and really anyone who actively supports women in getting this medical procedure is that they could be facing up to 5 years of prison time. And of course, this is because it is now considered a third-degree felony because the law is now in effect as of today.
Wow. So abortions in Florida, you know, they'd actually gone up last year, Nidia, because women were coming in from neighboring states where it was already banned. We showed that map of the South. What are healthcare providers there in Florida telling you about what they anticipate is going to happen now?
Healthcare providers here in Florida are anticipating that they're going to have to turn away the majority of women who in the next couple of weeks, in the next couple of months, will be approaching their clinics and seeking an abortion, as the majority of the women seeking an abortion will be past the 6-week mark. And now as women begin to look for out-of-state options, they're going to confront the reality, this new reality that most of the abortion access in the southeast part of the U.S. is severely limited. And we're talking about North Carolina and Virginia being some of the closest states to women in Florida where they can receive abortion access, as there is abortion access past the 6-week mark. But of course, this is only possible if it is financially feasible to women. And now healthcare providers here in Florida are also anticipating that with the clinics in the states that do have abortion access, these are going to be overwhelmed with so many women trying to get these abortion services, and it's going to impact the time frame in which a woman can receive an abortion.
Yeah, no question. It will be logistically and financially very complicated for women in the South who want to leave the South to get an abortion. Nidia, last month, Florida Supreme Court ruled to allow a November ballot measure on making abortion rights part of the state's constitution, very similar to what we were just discussing in Arizona. These ballot measures have been successful in other states, but Florida could be a bigger hurdle, right?
Nancy, that's correct. And that's because voters here in Florida will have the option of voting for abortion access in their ballot when they head to the voting booth in November. But the reality is that in order to be able to enshrine abortion access into the state's constitution, this ballot initiative would need to count with 60% of voter support. And realistically speaking, this is a significantly high threshold, and it's a threshold where other states have fallen short of meeting. And so this is a new reality that women in Florida are facing, that while they can vote for abortion access in November, it's a complicated situation.
Yeah, usually those ballot measures tend to get 56, 57% of the vote, but 60% is a really difficult threshold to meet. Nydia Cavazos, thanks so much for joining us. This afternoon, the Federal Reserve decided to leave interest rates unchanged. It's the sixth straight meeting in which the Fed has decided to keep rates steady. The last hike came in July of last year. Rates are at their highest level in more than 20 years. Today's decision was expected by economic forecasters because inflation still is sticking stubbornly around 2.7, 2.8%. Could Dearborn, Michigan hold the key to the 2024 election? How the war in Gaza could impact President Biden's re-election. We're going to talk to the city's mayor next on America Decides. Stay with us.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
Does this carrier strike group stand ready?
It's just incredible to see there's an active search and rescue operation going on 12 hours after this accident.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I use sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Donald Trump is campaigning tonight in Michigan, a battleground state that has gained even more attention than usual this election year due to the Israel-Hamas war. You might remember back in February, more than 100,000 votes in the state were cast for uncommitted instead of for President Biden in the primary as a show of protest against his handling of the war. A new CBS News poll shows more than 1/3 of Michigan voters want the president to encourage Israel to stop its military actions in Gaza. And nearly 1/4 want these actions to be decreased. Joining us now is Abdullah Hammoud. He is the mayor of Dearborn, Michigan. Dearborn is the city with the largest Muslim population per capita in the nation. Mr. Mayor, thanks so much for joining us. I want to start by asking you about what we've seen the past few days on college campuses. And I want to ask you if you think that the pro-Palestinian anti-war message, which many Americans would say is a very valid message, is getting overshadowed by the tactics that are being used by some protesters, including encampments, taking over school buildings, blocking entry to campus, that sort of thing.
I think if you look at history, if you look at the protest to the war in Vietnam, if you look at the protest to apartheid South Africa, many of the protests happening today on campuses largely resemble the protests that happened in the 80s and in the 60s. And so, unfortunately, even then, the protesters were viewed by mainstream media as being perpetually in the wrong. Again, these are folks who are protesting against a genocide, protesting against the idea that their tuition dollars, that our U.S. taxpayer dollars, are being used to fund the ongoing genocide that has now killed over 35,000 Palestinians, half of which are children.
Mr. Mayor, the White House has sent some high-ranking officials to meet with you, and I'm wondering if you feel that the concerns that you shared with them, the concerns of members of your community, have been understood and acted on by the administration.
Absolutely not. I think we have seen a slight change in tone as it reflects in the recognition of Palestinian suffering, but we have not seen any substantial or significant change in policy. To this day, our president has still been unable to call for a permanent ceasefire, which is the only means of bringing home all the hostages and prisoners across the entirety of the conflict, as well as an inability to hold Benjamin Netanyahu and the most right-wing government accountable for restricting access to humanitarian aid. And we're still looking for that final push for this president to also call for once and for all the establishment of a just Palestinian state to end this in a positive resolution for the Palestinian people.
How do you think that the president should hold Netanyahu accountable?
I think he has the ability to pick up the phone today and end the endless supply of weapons and bombs that are being dropped indiscriminately on residential towers. When I have a resident come to us and talk about how he had two grandmothers who had to be dug up from under the rubble because 2,000-pound bombs were dropped indiscriminately on the residential towers, that is unacceptable. And we have a president that is able to stop the supply of weapons, to restrict military aid. We have found just recently, obviously, there's been many documentation by experts in genocide, experts in war crimes, by NGOs and international organizations who have found the Israeli IDF complicit in multiple war crimes. Yet we have a government that looks the other way and has refused to hold them accountable.
Mayor Hammoud, we had a recent CBS News poll. It was out this week, and it showed that President Biden and former President Trump are neck and neck in your state. As a Democrat yourself, you've articulated some of your frustrations with the Biden administration, but have you decided whether you will support President Biden for re-election? And if not, do you think that Donald Trump would do more for the Palestinians than Biden has?
Time I have even thought about what I will do once casting my vote come November. What we're aiming to do is utilize all the tools at our disposal right now to hold this president accountable, to try to get President Biden to move with the center of the party, because the center of the party has moved. You have seen in poll after poll, even with the images that you have shown on the screen, that the majority of Democrats, independents, and even Republicans are advocating for permanent ceasefire. The majority of young people believe that what is unfolding is now a genocide. And the majority of Americans also believe in restricting military aid to the Israeli government. And yet we have a president that has refused to heed the concerns of the constituents that he is trying to represent from coast to coast. And that is what we were trying to do, hold this president accountable and keep surmounting that pressure until we see change.
I want to ask you about an issue beyond the war. That same CBS News poll I mentioned showed that more than 3/4 of voters in your state listed the economy and inflation as major factors for them in this election. Many of them also said they felt the economy was better under Trump. What's your view? Was the economy better then?
I think right now, from a municipal perspective, as mayor, we have access, obviously, to many resources due to transformational legislation that has been passed, allowing us to make investments that have been deferred for quite some time. Obviously, we're facing challenging times, as is every country across this globe. But I do want to return the focus back to what's happening in Gaza, because traditionally speaking, most voters would not have ranked foreign policy as a primary issue that they would take into account when going in to vote come this November election. But we're seeing that shift happen. People do not want want to be complicit in the genocide. And I do believe that the war that is unfolding, that the genocide in Gaza is going to be a top of mind issue for the deciding electorate come November.
No question. Mayor Abdullah Hammoud, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Donald Trump trades the New York courtroom for the campaign trail. We're in the contested state of Wisconsin as the presumed Republican nominee rallies supporters there. They're streaming America Decides.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes. Did you ever have these problems before the derailment? No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
With your help, we're going to win Wisconsin this November. We're going to defeat crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of our country. And we're going to make America great again.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was Donald Trump in Wisconsin this afternoon. With his New York City criminal trial in recess for the day, the former president is on the campaign trail in the Midwest. And our Olivia Rinaldi is there as well, following Donald Trump in Wisconsin. Good to see you, Olivia.
Good to see you, Nancy, from a very windy Wisconsin. It was Trump's first time back on the trail today since that hush money trial started in New York. It was very interesting today.
So tell me a little bit about what he had to say. I know that he once again said that if he doesn't win in November, the country is not going to survive. Some more of that apocalyptic rhetoric that we've come to expect from him. What else did he have to say?
He has some very notable rhetoric from the former president today, as you mentioned, saying the country might not survive if he doesn't win. He also went on to say he would reinstate a Muslim ban. That would be something that he would be interested in. He enacted that during his first term, and that was upheld by the Supreme Court ultimately in 2018. But something also notable that he talked about today were some of those protests that we've seen unfolding across college campuses all over the country, those protests that have turned violent in the last couple of days. Take a listen to what he had to say here about the topic.
Oh, Olivia, looks like we didn't have that shot for some reason. We're missing that shot. We'll get back to it.
Sorry,
But
Nancy.
no problem. In the meantime, let me ask you about something else that he talked about in that speech. Obviously, abortion is in the news today in Florida, in Arizona, and he waded right into the issue, saying people are thrilled with what's going on. Our polling doesn't show that people are thrilled. What did he mean by that?
Mostly talking about how his administration, during the first Trump administration, was part of the effort to put Supreme Court justices on the court that would then overturn Roe versus Wade. That's been his whole underlying issue and point on this the entire time. He is the president. He is the person who has sent this back to the states, that this was an argument and something that legal scholars have been contending for 53 years. And he said he solved it. He sent it back to the states, and now it's in their hands. But he did admit, as you mentioned, some people aren't going to be happy, that Democrats, Republicans, some people aren't going to be happy, and that it's up to each state whether they want a conservative abortion ban, something more liberal, as he likes to point out. You know, and something Nydia was talking about earlier, about in the South, we're seeing especially the effects of that in Florida right now with a 6-week abortion ban that is now enacted. So it's all playing out in these crucial battleground states. So he kind of toes the line on that issue, not really embracing a federal abortion ban, but also taking credit for being the person to send it back to the states.
And quickly, Olivia, one last thing that I thought was curious. He said that when he was president, he fired 9,000 sadists and bad people. What did he mean by that?
There he was talking about civil servants, and he was talking kind of in the context there about the VA and how veterans have seen a lot of difficulty in getting appointments. As you know, that's been something, the system there has been very clouded. Veterans have to wait days, months, sometimes years to get on these appointment lists through the Veterans Affairs Department. He was talking about there how he was the one who was able to fire a lot of these civil servants, called them sadists, and saying that they were out to hurt some of these veterans and their people. There's a very interesting, notable rhetoric there from the former president, but he did point out that Wisconsin is a very heavily veteran state, kind of speaking those constituents there that he would like to see turn out for him in November.
And folks around him have said he'd like to get rid of more civil servants if he wins another term. Olivia Rinaldi in windy Wisconsin, thanks so much. The head of a U.S. healthcare system that became paralyzed by a cyber attack earlier this year says his company is making, quote, substantial progress in restoring services. UnitedHealth Group CEO Andrew Whitty discussed the February attack while testifying before lawmakers on Capitol Hill today.
To all those impacted, let me be very clear. I'm deeply, deeply sorry. As we've responded to this attack, including dealing with the demand for ransom, my overarching priority has been to do everything possible to protect people's personal health information. The decision to pay a ransom was mine. This was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
UnitedHealth Group has not disclosed the amount of ransom it handed over to the Russia-based group that hacked it, but it reportedly paid tens of millions of dollars in Bitcoin. The cyber attack shut down operations at hospitals and pharmacies for more than a week. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is following through on her threat to force a vote to oust House Speaker Mike Johnson next week. The Georgia Republican claims Johnson has become a different person since taking the gavel.
I voted for Mike Johnson because his voting record before he became Speaker was conservative. Once he became Speaker, he has become a man that none of us recognize.
Not many Republicans with her on that. Democratic leaders in the House have already said they will kill the measure.
These people are not Columbia students.
They are not affiliated with the university, and they are working to escalate the situation.
Police move into Columbia University, ending the pro-Palestinian protest on campus, with similar scenes still playing out at college campuses across the country. More on that when we get back. You're streaming America Decides.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go.
You guys good?
Hey. All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Protests over the Israel-Hamas war are continuing to disrupt numerous universities across the U.S. Today, police clashed with protesters at the University of Wisconsin's Madison campus, while demonstrators at Fordham University's Lincoln Center campus launched an indoor encampment. And UCLA canceled all classes after violence erupted there overnight. A pro-Palestinian encampment remains intact on that campus. CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano is in New York City. Lilia, it's good to see you. Hundreds of protesters in New York have now been arrested. What's the latest you're seeing and hearing there?
Yeah, there were almost 300 protesters arrested last night between the Columbia campus. Most of the people arrested were those who were manifesting inside the university, people who had been taken over the Hamilton Hall, which is this building right behind me, a couple of days ago. There were about 109 people who were arrested. I heard from protesters who said when NYPD showed up, they used the sledgehammers to get into the building, into the structure. They were able to get everybody out. They gave students and those otherwise in the campus an opportunity to walk away. The ones that resisted were then taken into city buses. They were cuffed with zip ties, processed. Later on, as we were covering this protest here and weren't able to get access into the university because police had done a whole barricade around several of these blocks, we heard that there was another protest. So we walked all the way uptown to the next protest, which was the City College of New York. And there, at the City College, which is a CUNY campus, there were even more people gathered outside of the university. There were a lot of those people who were arrested there, and finally police breached that gate, which had been shut, and cleared another encampment. The total people who were arrested there were 173 people, so that sums up to those 300 or so, or nearly 300 protesters. We are hearing from the students here that showed up to manifest here and from many of the faculty that they oppose the bringing police into campus. They said that they had been protesting peacefully and that they had not reached an agreement with the school administration, with the president of the university, and that they denounced the fact that ultimately, after that impasse, they were forced to move their encampment or that police would be called. And in fact, eventually after the taking over of this building, police were called in. So there's been a lot of debate and pointing fingers and people calling on the university president to show up to be held accountable for something that many of the protesters here say is their freedom of speech. Others say, look, it was done, including the university president, for the safety of the students and after things got out of hand. The mayor of New York, Eric Adams, had pointed the finger at outside agitators. He quoted that to say that the way that the protests here escalated was because of outside forces or other people outside. I asked students and faculty members, and they said, look, that's a way to discredit our legitimate protests that began 2 weeks ago, actually months ago, here on campus, and that they say had been peaceful. But of course, we've also been covering concerns over hateful speech or anti-Semitism. We're going to have much more of our coverage from here and other campuses across the university on Evening News.
Lily Luciano, with that very thorough wrap-up, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let's bring in our panel, Sabrina Siddiqui and Dr. Nicordole Corte. Sabrina is a national politics reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and Nicordole is a professor at Pepperdine University and the host of the political radio show A More Perfect Union. He's also working on an upcoming book about Vice President Kamala Harris. Good day to both of you. Thanks for being here. Obviously, a lot to talk about when it comes to these protests and specifically how the administration is talking about them, not talking about them. We certainly don't see the president out in public talking about them essentially at all.
I mean, we're certainly not hearing nearly enough from the White House. I mean, we heard from Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff just this afternoon. And what he said, was what a lot of people, a lot of fair-minded people are thinking, which is, look, we should be able to protect freedom to protest peacefully, freedom to assemble peacefully on campuses. But when we allow counter-protesters to, launch, terrible, epitaphs at student protesters, to literally launch pyrotechnics, to throw them into encampments, we can't allow that to happen. And so, we need more folks in positions of leadership to say that louder. And there's no louder bully pulpit than the President of the United States.
There really isn't. So what's the strategy here? Why aren't we hearing more from him?
I've talked a lot to White House officials about this, and this is a very complex issue, of course, that they've been grappling with because on the one hand, you've seen the spread of these campus protests across the country, and the story has become more about the protests themselves. University leaders in many of these cases have responded in a very heavy-handed way, dispatching law enforcement, arresting hundreds of students and faculty members who are there trying to help protect the students who are protesting. On the other hand, what these protests are doing is they're once again putting at the center of national discourse the war, the Israel-Hamas war and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and specifically the administration's handling of the war. Because, these students are not only calling on universities to divest, from any business ties that they have with Israeli companies or the Israeli government. They're also calling for a ceasefire. They're also calling for an end to U.S. aid to Israel. So I think one of the challenges here is the president has tried to, be a little bit more empathetic to the Palestinian side of this conflict in recent weeks or months, especially as he's come under criticism for the situation on the ground in Gaza and maybe not saying enough, not doing enough. But at the same time, I think they don't want to appear as though they're siding with the cause at hand, since there's no shift in policy here.
Right. They're not willing to cut off military aid. They're not willing to do most of the things that these protesters want them to do.
They're not. And there's been cases where they've condemned, some incidents of anti-Semitism, but I think some of these protesters also want to see them equally condemn when the protesters themselves have been attacked. If there's been anti-Palestinian or Islamophobic rhetoric, they haven't maybe been as outspoken about those incidents. So, this really is also fundamentally, about free speech. And so I think, at some point we would expect to hear the president come out and I think speak amid all this unrest that you're seeing across the country, even though most of these protests, it's worth underscoring, are peaceful.
Clearly, a lot of these universities don't know how to handle this either. And you see different colleges and universities sort of taking different approaches to try to figure out what, if anything, works.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've seen examples of, what to do from universities like Northwestern, like Brown University, who actually said, we're going to have a conversation with student protesters and we're going to reach an agreement that is going to have some enforcement mechanism in that agreement, but is going to help tamp down, bring the temperature down on these campuses. Look, there's a rich tradition of student protests on college campuses across the country. I don't think anybody should dispute that or try to limit that. But when there is violence that erupts, when you have counter protesters that are baiting lawful, peaceful protesters into a fight, that's a problem. And so, my alma mater, the University of Southern California, hasn't quite got this right. It has been trying to find its footing after banning a young Muslim woman, from delivering the commencement address as a valedictorian. And what's so strange is, she was one of 100 of the top students. She went through a process by which she was selected. She happened to be a biomedical engineering major and had a minor in resistance to genocide. That's the degree that she got from the University of Southern California. But then all of a sudden, they weren't having her as a commencement speaker. And the explanation for that has left people baffled. They're calling it a security concern. Right. But this is a university that's hosted President Obama and, much more sort of divisive
And they haven't said
figures.
What the concern is, right?
Absolutely not. And so the University of Southern California, my alma mater, love the Trojans, but, haven't quite got this right. But right. Brown University, Northwestern are examples of what it looks to get it right. And the one thing I would also add is that the University of California president has called for an independent investigation as to what happened at UCLA in terms of the planning on the university's part, what actually transpired between protesters and counter-protesters, and the response from law enforcement. And so these are examples of leadership that are really models for the country at a time where, a lot of folks are looking for leadership.
I just want to say a couple of weeks ago when this began at Columbia University, you had one of the first kind of major student encampments. It was a peaceful demonstration. There were also so many Jewish students, by the way, who are participating in these protests, too. They were having Seder together. Passover celebrations were taking place at these encampments. And that's when Columbia, because they didn't disperse, called the New York Police Department. They arrested more than 100 students. That's when you saw some of the escalation happen with people coming in from outside of the university. And also that's when you saw many of these other encampments spreading across the country in solidarity with these students. So it kind of shows that if you take this heavy-handed approach and you don't talk to the students, the escalation is actually coming from the universities themselves, not the protesters.
Right. Some of these clashes really overshadowing what is a very important issue. Sabrina Siddiqui, Nicordelai Corte, thanks to both of you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Ron DeSantis does not want to be Trump's vice president, but could another Florida man want the job? We'll explain why next on America Decides.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. and reach for the stars.
Here we are. Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
At the CBS Evening News, we focus on solutions, finding solutions to healthcare problems, how much money we can spend on groceries, finding solutions to help people understand what are the right choices to make for you and your family.
Advisors for Donald Trump say a name consistently coming up these days as his potential running mate is one of the many rivals the former president faced in 2016, Florida Senator Marco Rubio. However, if Rubio ultimately isn't Trump's pick for vice president, it might not be because of what he represents, but because of the state he represents. A new article in The Bulwark explores Trump's consideration of Senator Rubio as his running mate and the unique reason why he may not choose him. The author of that article, Mark Caputo, joins us now. He's a national political reporter for The Bulwark and the author of the MAGAville newsletter. Okay, Mark, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start right there. It would be very unusual to see a presidential candidate and a running mate both be from the same state, because usually the strategy is you choose someone who helps you in another part of the country. But in this case, both men are from Florida. So does that weaken Rubio's chances of being chosen?
Well, it weakens his chances in that the 12th Amendment of the Constitution essentially forbids it, in the wonky rules of the Electoral College. If the vice president and president hail from the same state, then that state's Electoral College votes won't go to the ticket. And so therefore, in Florida, that's 30, it's 11% of the total. That's not something that Donald Trump wants to lose out on. And Florida used to be a swing state, is now barely a battleground. It's in his pocket. You don't want to endanger those votes. So the easy thing to do would be to have Marco Rubio just move. The Constitution also says the United States senator has to be 35 years old at least, has to have lived in the state for, 7 years. Also has to be a resident or inhabitant of the state when they're elected. After they're elected, they can actually kind of move according to one strict reading of the Constitution. So technically, Rubio could just do that and change his address to D.C. There's an additional wrinkle, though, with Rubio and the name you also mentioned, which is Ron DeSantis. Donald Trump still doesn't like Ron DeSantis. And if Marco Rubio were to resign his post, then that would give Ron DeSantis the ability to pick a successor. And depending on when that resignation happens, that successor could be in office for 2 years. Donald Trump doesn't want Ron DeSantis to have a successor. So, according to the sources we've spoken to, one of the things that Donald Trump is going to consider is that if he does pick Rubio, not only would Rubio have to change his address, he might have to resign his office rather instantly in order to trigger a special election or an election in November. And this would be the first time, if this happens, that Florida would have had a double Senate election in the same year since 1936. Now, all this stuff is very theoretical. Trump hasn't really paid a lot of attention to this. He's in trial right now. So once he's out of trial, later this month, then he's really going to start putting sort of rubber to the road or his glasses to the dossier.
This is all kind of head spinning, particularly the part where the senator from Florida would have to move out of Florida to be eligible to be Donald Trump's running mate. But setting that aside, there's another big issue here, and you wrote about it in your article. It's the fact that Rubio ran a scorched earth campaign against Trump in 2016, even went after the size of Trump's hands. Trump called him Little Marco for months. Yeah. I don't even think Rubio would have wanted to be Trump's running mate back then. So why might he want it now?
Well, the two of them have grown rather close, or they grew rather close, especially when Trump became president. One of the things that was interesting in the 2016 race is Donald Trump crushed Marco Rubio, including in their now mutual home state of Florida. But there was one county, only one of 67, that Donald Trump lost. That was Miami-Dade County, which is where I live, where Rubio lives. It's a heavy, heavy Cuban-American county. And Trump didn't like that loss. And also he lost the county by 30 points to Hillary Clinton in 2016 when he did win the state. Anyway, once Rubio got reelected to the Senate and Trump got elected as president, the two grew close, and Rubio became an architect of Donald Trump's Cuba policy. And he became a de facto Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere. In fact, he even was so close and so well regarded by Trump that Rubio at one point talked him out of military action, taking up military action in Venezuela. So it gives you an idea of the close working relationship the two had, and they've continued to have it, or they've had a more than a détente, a friendship and a mutual respect. Now, just to be very clear, the name we hear circulate the most, and apparently the name that Donald Trump mentions the most, is J.D. Vance. He's the Ohio senator. However, the people I've spoken to said, look, if Rubio wasn't from Florida, if these weren't the issues, he would more than likely be the pick. He not only has been tested by fire, Rubio, having run for president, he's a 3-term senator. He has that foreign policy experience. And unlike, except one other senator who's a Democrat in Menendez in the Senate, Marco Rubio is the only bilingual senator who can speak Spanish fluently, easily, and in fact, at one point was a pundit on some Spanish language networks here when he was in between political jobs. And that's a very attractive thing for Donald Trump to want. Now, what he decides, again, we don't know. I think we're going to find out in, probably in May. The calculation I did and looking at how Florida's election law works is that if Trump wants Marco Rubio, he would probably have to make that announcement by around June 10th to June 14th.
Super fascinating. We'll be watching. Mark Caputo, thank you so much for the insights. Really appreciate it. Waiting and hoping to cross into America, we're going to head south of the border to take a look at the humanitarian impact of those searching for the American dream. You're streaming America Decides.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that? Why won't you say the word crisis? You're not answering my question.
Is this really
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean? What does that mean in
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their perspective.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
So if we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
When people say who's first to get in the morning, that would be me. Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way.
We'll take you places, we teach you new things, and we make you feel like, you know, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
Tonight, how college officials are responding to escalating student protests to the Israel-Hamas war. Then, beating the high cost of summer camps, and how quick-thinking police officers saved a man trapped in a house fire on the CBS Evening News.
While the debate over how to handle the influx of migrants rages on here in Washington, CBS News immigration reporter Camila Montoya Galvez traveled to Juarez, Mexico this week to take a look at the humanitarian impact south of the border.
We're in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, an epicenter of a humanitarian crisis that is often overlooked in the immigration debate in the U.S. You can see dozens of migrants here waiting to enter the U.S. Some of them have been here for 2 weeks, they tell us. Some of them are families with really young children, unaccompanied minors, and others who have been waiting for days to get to the U.S., but this is in their way. Miles and miles of razor wire, fencing, and other barriers set up by the state of Texas as part of Operation Lone Star. And that is that operation by Texas Governor Greg Abbott that has tried to challenge in many ways the federal government's longstanding purview over immigration. Another component of that fight is that law known as SB 4. Texas is right now trying to seek the power to arrest migrants for crossing the border illegally. That currently is a federal crime, but they want to make it a state crime. The federal court system is currently weighing that court case and could decide in the coming days and weeks whether or not Texas can actually implement SB 4 and arrest migrants for immigration violations.
Camila Montoya Galvez, thank you. Tune in to the Daily Report with John Dickerson tomorrow for more on the humanitarian toll from Mexico, right here on CBS News 24/7.
I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda. And on nights like this one, we can say to those families who have lost loved ones to al-Qaeda's terror, justice has been done.
That was President Obama 13 years ago tonight. You probably remember that. He was announcing that the U.S. had killed Osama bin Laden. Even a decade after the September 11th attacks, the search for bin Laden was still top of mind for many Americans. Here was our David Martin on CBS News that night with analysis.
Let's look at it from the president's point of view. He said that when he took office, the first thing he told his CIA director, Leon Panetta, was that he wanted getting bin Laden to be the #1 priority in the war against al-Qaeda.
People in Washington and New York City took to the streets to celebrate after the announcement. Former First Lady Michelle Obama surprised thousands of high school students in Washington, D.C. this week in celebration of College Signing Day, which is traditionally the final day students decide where they want to pursue higher education. She applauded students for navigating school during the COVID-19 pandemic. Take a listen.
Despite all of these unusual obstacles, you all pushed through. And you did it with grit and determination and optimism, even when you didn't feel so optimistic.
First Lady also encouraged students to seek out financial aid, saying higher education is not, quote, just for the privileged few. Wise words. And that does it for today. We're going to be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for May 1st, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. The clash of activism, free speech, and public safety on college campuses continued coast to coast Wednesday. At UCLA, students fought each other into the night at makeshift barricades with whatever